Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw. I'm here with Matthew Upchurch, who's chairman and CEO of Virtuoso. And we want to take a little time today to remember Matthew's father, Jesse Upchurch, who passed away a few weeks ago, I think at age 93, and remember his impact on the industry. And this is Insider Travel Report. Now, Matthew, first of all, my condolences on the loss of your father. He was a great man. I've met him a number of times over the years, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the history of his involvement in the travel industry and his impact on the industry. How did he begin in the industry?
Well, he was originally an engineer, and he actually, in the war, he had a naval commission, but was actually was assigned to the Merchant Marines. Right after the war, he became the chief electrical engineer on the USS Washington, which is where he met my mom, who ironically was on an American Express package.
There's a travel story ever there, right?
This is why we're all family in the travel business, and so they actually met that way. And then after he left the United States line and got married to my mom, he did other things in engineering, but then they ended up buying, getting together with a group of other friends, and they bought what was Vagabond Cruises. They got into the yacht chartering business and all that.
I didn't even know that. They started in yacht chartering.
Yacht chartering business, and then he developed some of the development in Marigot Bay. And then we moved to Mexico City, where I was born, and he got involved there. He built the first timeshares in Acapulco. He bought an agency in Mexico City called Antonio Perez, which was both an agency and a hotel representation business. I think one of and then he bought Percival Tours from
which was the beginning of
which was really the beginning of the larger operation. Harold Percival was a British gentleman that started the company. It was a pretty small company.
And what was the focus of Percival? What do you think?
European motor coach. Mm-hmm. And then he moved. It was based in New York. Then he moved the headquarters to L.A. And then started building it there and started getting outside of that. You know, there are little things I like to share about my dad sometimes about innovation that it's like things that we take for granted. He was the first tour operator to ever retrofit motor coaches in Europe with air conditioning.
Which now we take for granted, right?
I mean, you wouldn't even think of, well, remember, European travel in the 60s, right? I mean, you were lucky and the hotels didn't have air conditioning, much less the motor coaches, like open the windows. So anyway, he did things like that, a lot of firsts. Then his other love was he really liked opening up new destinations, and of course, two of his biggest loves were Africa and India.
And I know you spent a lot of time as a child there as well.
Well, and Africa was really probably his first love because he was Percival Tours Nairobi was established by my father and Jock Leslie Melville, and those of people that have been to the Giraffe Manor. That was actually the home of Jock and Betty Leslie Melville. So the whole Rothschild Giraffe thing and all that, and we owned some lodges. He was partners with Jack Block in Kenya. So we did a lot of that, and then we, he evolved Percival, and I was very, very fortunate to grow up in that kind of travel company. A lot of my exposure also to the travel industry was when he and a group of people, a small group, founded USTOA.
Well, that was interesting, and I've had long connections with USTOA, but I had forgotten that your father did have a real big hand in creating that group, along with, I guess, Arthur Tauk and a few other people.
Well, actually, yeah, I mean, it was actually and a lot of people don't know, USTOA started in L.A. Actually, it was actually Tyler Tanaka, Paul Albrecht, Mike Alford, my dad, and another. It was a small group. Jimmy Murphy.
Jimmy Murphy, of course, and Gary.
Here we are with and Jimmy. Arthur and Jimmy were the two. You had little 10-year-old, 11-year-old running around these meetings, and they were very, very kind to me. But USTA was a big part of it, of what he did.
Yeah, well, I remember, and I was lucky enough to do the last interview with Jimmy Murphy before he passed away, and it was just such a wonder to hear his background and to know your father was involved in that as well, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's funny, there actually is an interesting connection between USTOA and what I do today. So when I was 17, actually, Bob Whitley had allowed me to do this. I went to
the former president of USTOA.
President of USTOA. Who my father was the chairman and CEO of USTOA that actually recruited Bob to come in. And I had this little idea because I had started in the family business, left the family business to develop some software. and then came back. And when I came back, I made this proposal. Bob let me make a presentation at the age of 17 to try to create a centralized brochure fulfillment center for USTOA operators, which later on I realized that was the germination of the idea that led to the centralized database of API.
That's right. So how did the Allied Percival come together?
Well, I wish I could tell you that I and my father, we were so smart that we knew what we were doing. The reality was that Percival Tours, outside of its normal regular escorted departures, we were a major player in FIT and special groups creation for agencies. Mm-hmm. So if you had a special group or you have an FIT, you came to us. The original Allied members, established in 1950, really what Allied Travel was, it was a jointly owned research and operations center it was a captive group, right? Like private circulation kind of thing. And I always loved to give incredible credit to those original Allied members because, sometimes when I do talks and stuff at Cornell or NYU or some of these places, I always like to kind of bring a little humility back. I said, because we think we're so original and we think we're so done something for the first time. You look at what the Allied members were doing in 1950. Today we would call it crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, right?
Yeah, just a different terminology.
Different name. Yeah. And so they got together. So when we first, we bought an agency when we were building the whole Upchurch travel thing in the 80s, we bought an agency that actually was a member of Allied. And in fact, the guy that we bought it from was the chairman at the time. And Allied had been around for 35 years, but the market was changing. Because it was run as a co-op and a nonprofit, they basically had no cash reserves. And then we bombed Gaddafi in 85, and they're sitting there with an office in Midtown Manhattan and 50 employees. And so we came along and said, look, should we do something? We decided to buy it from the members, from the owners, turn it into a membership organization. And then what happened was it was primarily to do FITs. I thought it was a great idea to buy, and I had really been the one that asked my dad, I think we should do this. Right. The whole idea was, we get these 65 amazing agencies to now be clients. And we had a 60% overlap of DMCs. But I show up at our first meeting in Madrid after it's now Allied Percival International. And I literally watch all of our members having these not so clandestine meetings with all our DMCs to go around us. And in those days, if the agency didn't call us to do the work, there was no revenue. Right. And I remember flying back and having, first of all, that was the longest flight of my career because I remember, how the hell am I going to explain this to my dad? Or this is going to be the shortest career in the history of the travel business. And I remember sitting down with my dad and saying, this is obviously, I just witnessed this. This isn't going away. And that's where he and I had that first discussion that became API Direct, which is now the Virtuoso Onsites, which was, what? Maybe what we do is, we'll keep providing these services, but why don't we let the agencies go direct? Why don't we facilitate that? And that was the first really major change that changed us from being really an operations-based business to a facilitation, a network, and then it went on from that to marketing.
Change the name and keep going on. Now, what was his view of all the various changes that you instituted over in the 90s and really grew the business and ultimately changed the name?
Well, what I'm extremely grateful to my father for is that he was, obviously I've been reflecting a lot since his passing, and he was a pioneer in his own right, and he never looked at things from the perspective of what's not possible, but what's possible. So I think that when we came to this, he didn't have a problem with the idea that something might fail. And I think I got from him the idea that failure is not failure unless you don't learn from it. And you think about that philosophy, it's pretty way ahead of its time. You look at a lot of the leading tech companies and leading organizational thought today, and one of them is fast prototyping and fast failure. because if it's done right, fast failure actually is one of the most powerful ways of learning and improving and innovating. So, I think, we have a lot of language, fancy language about this today, but he was there, so I learned that. And then the other thing that I really feel deeply is, we talk about enriching lives for human connection as being our greatest purpose. Yeah. And I think that's something that my father, when I got all these emails and cards and calls and whatever, just the incredible things and people, he was of that generation. We didn't sit around and talk about our vulnerabilities like we do today.
Let's get deep into it. No, I didn't it with my father either, so that's...
We didn't do that, but he lived it, and he just had a joy of connecting with people. He was so funny. He told stories,
Well, you talked a little bit the other day about it, his smile, his look, is a twinkle in his eye, I think.
Yeah, and he had that incredible thing that when you were sitting with him, you were the center of the universe, right? You were talking, and he was talking about that, and so I'm very grateful to him. And he's, like I said, he not only infused this love of travel, but just kind of the idea that it's like, what do I want? Not focusing on what do I want, not what I don't want.
Right. Yeah. Well, Matthew, my condolences again to your dad. He was a great man. Great that we're celebrating his life today. Right. What an incredible career and what an incredible legacy he gave to you in creating this organization. And we'll look for more from you in the future, and we'll always remember him.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of myself, my family, I just want to thank everybody that has been so generous with everything that they've sent to us. It's really meant a lot to my family, so thank you.
I'm James Shillinglaw, and this is Insider Travel Report.